For those of you who don't know me, my name is Tara Catanzano. I am the Associate Director of Academic Career Development in the Office of Faculty Affairs. And this is the third installment of our new series, Building Your Toolbox for Academic Advancement. And I'm honored to have the opportunity to introduce today Dr. Gottlieb, who is a professor of medicine and obstetrics and gynecology and the inaugural Associate Dean for Faculty Affairs at UMass Baystate. She's also the Chief Faculty Development Officer at Baystate Health. Dr. Gottlieb joined the executive leadership team in 2015 to help establish our new regional medical school. Prior to that, she was on faculty at Brown University for 10 years, where she served in numerous educational, clinical, and administrative leadership roles. Dr. Gottlieb received her undergraduate degree in economics from Harvard University and her medical degree from the University of Chicago's Pritzker School of Medicine. She completed a residency in general internal medicine at Brown. Prior to entering medicine, Dr. Gottlieb worked in corporate finance and is currently the chair-elect of the Association of American Medical Colleges Group on Women in Medicine and Science Steering Committee. Most recently, Dr. Gottlieb published a book, which I highly recommend, on closing the gender pay gap in medicine, a roadmap for healthcare organizations and the women physicians who work for them, which was published in October of 2020 by Springer.
I'm going to talk today about promotion planning and CV creation, and specifically with an eye towards promotion to associate professor or full professor. I have no disclosures or conflicts of interest, and then outline a general roadmap of what I'd like to cover today includes the following. I'm going to describe in some detail UMass Medical School's areas of distinction rubric. I will elaborate on promotion metrics for associate professor, primarily touch a little bit on professor, and then do a pretty deep dive into the promotion process, which will involve a discussion of some CV tips, the narrative statement, teaching evaluations, and letters of evaluation. So as most of you may know, in December of 2017, UMass Medical School completely overhauled its academic personnel policy and went to a rubric for academic advancement based on areas of distinction. There are 4 areas of distinction in this scheme: healthcare delivery, education, investigation, and pop health and public policy. And this slide is actually from UMass. UMass likes to view the AODs as 4 lanes along a single highway for appointment and promotion. And what they mean by that is most folks will come in and be appointed at the junior faculty level in an area of distinction and continue along that same lane through promotion to associate and full professor. However, there is allowance or the bandwidth for folks whose careers evolve into different domains to switch lanes based on, of course, contributions and achievements to a different AOD. So it's really critical for me to emphasize that most clinical faculty here at our regional campus, UMass Medical School Baystate, will be in the healthcare delivery area of distinction. One question my team and I often get is, what about the education AOD? And so I want to be explicit and share with you all that education as an area of distinction is really for folks whose role and or FTE are primarily educational and whose scholarship and recognition in their field reflect their pedagogical contribution. It's not really for folks who have a lot of leadership or activities in healthcare delivery and who teach residents and who teach medical students. That's kind of a baseline assumption for anybody who works at Baystate. It's really for those individuals who are writing and speaking and creating curricula regionally and nationally that belong in the education area of distinction. This is a traditional academic trajectory, and before we kind of jump into the meat of the talk, I want to make sure we're all on the same page in terms of nomenclature. So for physicians and folks with terminal degrees, so PhDs, most individuals come into an academic institution at the assistant professor level. Now at UMass Medical School, the expectation is that folks will remain at that rank at the assistant professor level for 6 years, before going up for promotion to the next rank, which is associate professor. And then the same expectation is that folks will stay at associate professor at that rank for about 6 years and then be promoted to the most senior rank, which is professor. Another point of nomenclature is that wherever you go in the US, the term senior rank typically denotes individuals who are at the associate or full professor level. At UMass Medical School Baystate, which is the same as at UMass Medical School down in Worcester, advancement or progression along this trajectory is based primarily on 3 buckets of activity. So 3 buckets of evidence: activities, scholarship, and recognition in one's area of distinction. And I'm going to unpack each of those. Examples of activities in a particular area of distinction are as follows. So healthcare delivery, that could be leadership or development of clinical services, diagnostic approaches, programs to improve quality and safety. On the educational side of things, curriculum development is very much a consistently expected endeavor, as is leadership of educational activities. And then, of course, clinical and didactic teaching of learners defined as med students, residents, fellows, or faculty of the medical school. Investigation is really for folks who are participating in systematic and funded generation of new knowledge, whether that's via laboratory, clinical, translational, implementation science, or health services research. The last area of distinction, pop health and public policy, was really created under this new academic personnel policy for folks down in Worcester who work for Commonwealth Medicine. Many of you may not be familiar with Commonwealth Medicine. It's essentially an enterprise on the Worcester campus that functions as an extension of the state legislature. It's really kind of a consulting arm for healthcare and public health policy in the state of Massachusetts. So these are the individuals who are writing legislation for kind of Medicaid coverage and the like. We talked about activities at one's area of distinction. Now let's move to scholarship. As part of the new academic personnel policy, the individuals who spent about 2 years creating the new metrics really did a deep dive into the concept of scholarship, and particularly for individuals who are in the healthcare delivery area of distinction. The new APP, the new academic personnel policy, truly has an expanded definition of the word. So for those of you who have been around a long time like me, you may remember that, up until really about a decade ago, in academic medicine, scholarship meant peer-reviewed publications. And as I mentioned, particularly for healthcare delivery, but also for education and some of the pop health and public policy, the definition of scholarship now includes, beyond peer-reviewed pubs, book chapters, presentations and workshops at society meetings, CME talks, educational materials like syllabi and curricula that have been disseminated, because for those of you in the room who are familiar with Boyer and Glassick, some of the key thought leaders historically in the definitions of scholarship, really scholarship implies dissemination of your work. Clinical guidelines and standard of care policies that have been disseminated are also viewed as scholarship, as well as safety and quality and patient care innovations and patents. So the last bucket, the last domain of progression is this notion of recognition in one's area of distinction. And recognition is really defined in terms of promotion. Remember, our lens here is looking towards associate and full professor. That lens means that recognition implies regional, national, or international reputation in one's field. And so there are many pieces of evidence to support that type of recognition. So one is honors and awards. Another is invited presentations or workshops and oral presentations at national meetings. I often get the question, what's the difference? So An invited presentation is something like a grand round. So say you're invited to give grand rounds at University of Chicago in your area of healthcare expertise. That's considered an invited presentation. Whereas perhaps if you are, say, a general internist like I am in my academic home, my professional society is the Society of General Internal Medicine, and I submit an abstract that is reviewed and is accepted as an oral. That's an oral presentation at a professional meeting. Another proxy for one's recognition is leadership of professional organizations. And I wish I had put kind of an asterisk here, because I will say for those of you in the healthcare delivery area of distinction or in education, this is really where our faculty need to be focusing their attention. Getting involved in one's professional societies on a national level, raising one's hand to join committees, and then moving forward in leadership of those endeavors. Editorial board work is also a symbol or a signifier of one's recognition, as are national level grant review committees and clinical consulting and referrals. I would like to expound a little bit on that last point. So here in Western Mass, we have a lot of folks who are really the go-to clinicians for individuals who live in this part of the state. UMass has been very clear that that does not satisfy this kind of requirement of a regional reputation. The clinical referrals here are things like if somebody from Maine is referring you a patient because you happen to have an expertise that can't be found in that area, or from Rhode Island. So that's regional. And then national, of course, is beyond New England. So in order to be promoted to associate professor, one has to demonstrate at least regional reputation or recognition in one's field. And for those folks who are in the investigation area of distinction, and we have very few of those here so far at UMass Medical School Baystate, there's actually a requirement for national recognition at the associate professor level. And that is standard throughout the country. It's not just UMass being extra strict. To be promoted to professor, the baseline requirement and expectation is that a candidate demonstrates a national level of recognition. To move on in our outline to kind of the promotion metrics, specifically, promotion to associate professor requires what's called established level of activities in one's area of distinction. And I'm going to unpack established in a second, but it also, promotion to associate professor requires two additional metrics, which is that one demonstrates at least entry-level activity in education and academic service. And entry level in education is satisfied by teaching. So those of you who work with residents or med students, either in the hospital or in the clinic, or are doing other types of academic endeavors with learners, that's enough to meet the criterion of entry level. And then academic service is, as you might imagine, committee work locally satisfies entry level. So I think it is important just to call out what the promotion metrics are for associate professor in education, because they are slightly different than in the three other areas of distinction. And that's because to be promoted to that rank in the area of distinction education, one has to demonstrate established level of activity in that domain, as well as at least entry in academic service. So there are two metrics for folks in this AOD versus three for all the others. I would like to unpack the three buckets I talked about with an eye towards looking at the healthcare delivery AOD, since most of the individuals on our campus will be in this lane of the highway. If you're not already familiar with these tables, I encourage you to go on to our Office of Faculty Affairs website and look at them. So there's a table that is provided for each area of distinction that lists the examples or evidence at each level of achievement. So today we are going to focus on the established level, which is of course for associate professor. And specifically, I want to draw your attention to, again, the three domains underneath that established level of achievement that candidates have to fulfill in order to be considered ready for promotion. And so with that in mind, let's move to achievement. So what are some examples or expectations of established level of achievement in one's healthcare delivery activity? So having a major responsibility for a clinical program or a quality initiative. So oftentimes how folks fulfill this metric is by being a medical director or a division chief or a significant leader of a QI or safety initiative in the institution. And that's the second bullet there, innovative approaches that improve safety, quality, or efficacy of care delivery. And you can see in this how this slide is laid out, all the other AODs, education, investigation, pop health, and public policy, have similar samples or examples of achievement at the established level, and academic service as well. So for scholarship, as I mentioned before, healthcare delivery has kind of an expanded view of what suffices for those expectations. Of course, peer-reviewed publications as a first or senior author, presentations at professional meetings, as I mentioned before, safety and quality studies that are disseminated, guidelines and policies that are disseminated, models of care coordination that are disseminated, or protocols for patient treatment or delivery of care. Again, the key being disseminated.
Dr. Gottlieb, can I interrupt and with a question in the chat? Is obtaining an MPH or an MBA degree, does that count towards scholarship?
Unfortunately, no. Now, if you produce scholarships, so some graduate programs, you need to write a thesis. And so if that's published, of course, that's scholarship. But unfortunately, it doesn't qualify in that domain for promotion. Great question. Recognition is the third bucket. And as I alluded to before, for healthcare delivery to be promoted to associate professor, one has to show evidence of at least regional recognition as demonstrated either by honors and awards, invited talks, or presentations at professional meetings, leadership positions, or, and I want to make sure I'm clear about that, appointed committee membership in professional organizations. So we have a lot of folks, particularly folks who've gone up for promotion to professor in healthcare delivery, who have been invited or appointed or nominated to sit on national guideline committees for their specialty. So something like that here on a regional level would absolutely be a proxy for one's recognition in one's field. I see a question here. Okay, let's see. Many faculty are involved in one or more lanes. Do you have to declare which AOD you're looking to get promoted in, or can you accomplish various things? That's a great question. So you do have to almost, I would say 99% of the time, you have one AOD. And that's because it's, there are a couple of reasons for that. One is it's actually a robust expectation to have those three buckets fulfilled, right? Recognition, scholarship, and essentially leadership in an area of distinction. So it is the rare person who can kind of fulfill both, six of them, right? Three in each domain. I will say, I don't know if this is what you were kind of reading, what you were kind of getting at. So oftentimes people are hired in healthcare delivery and then pretty quickly differentiate into becoming educators here. I shouldn't say oftentimes. I should say it's frequent enough that my team and I have this conversation. And so really that raises both an opportunity and a challenge. And this is anecdotal, but it's pretty consistent anecdotally. I've seen a lot of this at Baystate. Because we're such a, and this is great, we're such a teaching institution with a long history of emphasis on that and expectation for our clinical faculty. So what that means is that if you're one of these individuals who is kind of morphed into an educator, it's really critical to be thinking about your scholarship in that domain, publishing in that domain, and getting recognition in that domain. Because what we've seen, and I'm sure there are folks on this call who may be able to attest to this, is that we bring in faculty who are, teaching and doing curriculum development here and are heavily involved in education, but their publications and their scholarship and perhaps their kind of society leadership is in healthcare delivery. And that means that they haven't fulfilled criteria in either domain. Let me share some common errors have made on their application. So that's a really good question. And I would say I think what you're probably getting at is maybe promotion planning versus errors in the application. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this. So I'm going to give you a short answer now, but I promise there'll be more. So the short answer is this is why the CV is so important. The CV is the currency upon which you are going to be not just kind of assessed for promotion readiness, but also there is a whole process of peer review that goes along with being promoted. And that, I mean, there are auxiliary documents, but the CV is really the main one. And the UMass CV, although I will attest, it is clunky formatting wise. We've all been through it. It is incredibly comprehensive in terms of capturing all the great work that you all do and need to do to be promoted. And so if you take away nothing from this talk today other than the following, and I'm following my own advice, I'm a full professor, but I've been doing this since I was first hired as junior faculty at Brown, is that your CV, you need to keep it up to date. You need to have a check-in, whether it's monthly, quarterly, to make sure that you are capturing all of your work in the right spaces. It's a great question. So real quickly, professor, because I want you all to be thinking big here, one needs to demonstrate what's called senior level of activity in one's area of distinction, and then established in a whole other category. So the bar that, the highest bar for associate professor was established. Now for professor, folks are being asked to achieve in their area of distinction, beyond that, and at least that in a whole different domain. And then entry in a third category. And one of the categories, you have to be at least entry in education. I will tell you, just by means to cut to the chase, that most folks who go up for full professor are senior, of course, in their area of distinction, and they make established in their academic service, because these are the individuals who are leading all your professional societies and leading all these guideline issuing committees on a national level. So education, again, just to call this out, because it's a little bit of a different animal. To be promoted to professor, one has to be senior in education, and you have to be established in academic service. The promotion process at any institution around the country looks like, that looks intimidating to me, and I do this every day. But I want to point out to you that there are two things. Of all the steps, about at least half, a little more than half, happen at the department level. That's really important. Your department is your home base, not just for your kind of daily life, but also for your promotion readiness. The other piece I want to point out is that my team and I spend a lot of energy making sure, kind of to get to the earlier question about errors in the application process, we spend a lot of time making sure that any promotion file that starts through this process, and certainly before it goes down for the final review to Worcester, is in great shape. And so I want to emphasize that promotion planning, you're all doing this right now. This is promotion planning. And these conversations really need to take place annually, and they need to take place at the department level. So currently, it's the department chairs, or in the larger departments like medicine or surgery, there are vice chairs for academic affairs. Those are the individuals you should be meeting with at least once a year to get you motivated to update your CV and to talk with these folks about kind of a gap analysis, what you need to be doing, and a timeline for that to get you to the next rank. Our hope, and we've been working towards this since I came here 5.5 years ago, is that the division chiefs are really going to hold more responsibility for this type of academic advancement mentorship. At most academic institutions in medicine across the country, it's the division chiefs that have this primary role. But, Baystate, up until 5 years ago, wasn't a medical school, and so didn't have that expectation of the division chiefs, but that's changing. Let me just point out this kind of circle here, or the square, I guess, that is called the basic file for promotion. And there are 4 elements or 4 components in that basic file: a CV in UMass format, a narrative statement, teaching evaluations, and letters of evaluation. And I'm going to dive into each of these. So the CV absolutely has to be in UMass format. We will send it back if it's not. And you can go on the Office of Faculty Affairs website. There are two templates. One is kind of the standard one you're all probably familiar with that has like, grid lines. And then there's more of a free form one. It's all the same order, but it's just how you like to navigate and type. Make sure if you are reviewing or you're using the standard template that you look at the hidden text before you start allocating activities, because it's really helpful. And make sure you read this CV guide first. You've probably all seen this. This is also on our website. It's about a page, and it's really helpful. This is the hidden text that I was alluding to. Okay, so to get granular about the CV, over 5 years of doing this, my team and I, there are kind of some consistent fault lines when we see CVs and when we look at them and assess them for promotion readiness, along with the departments. These tips come out of that. So educational activities, there's a ton of real estate on the UMass CV intentionally for all of your educational endeavors. Be comprehensive. Document your items in a bulleted line-by-line format. Nobody wants to read paragraphs. Be very, very attentive to specifying the department, the institution, the city and state, the types and number of learners, the duration and frequency. This CV is going to be read throughout the promotion, that trajectory, that process, by many individuals, in fact, mostly by individuals who have no idea about Baystate, who may have no idea about your specialty. So you want to be as communicative as possible in a bulleted fashion on your CV about your teaching endeavors. One quick thing that may not affect some of you on here because we're far enough out, but when Baystate transitioned from its kind of loose academic affiliation with Tufts to its more robust, regional campus affiliation, we had individuals, and this continues, who have been doing kind of ongoing activities that spanned that transition to list them on their CV as such. So current activities begun prior to 2016 should be described as, quote, University of Massachusetts Medical School, Baystate, parens, formerly Tufts University School of Medicine, Baystate. Teaching activities and programs and courses. This is another header on the CV, on the UMass CV. If you're giving multiple lectures to the same group, you can just list it once, noting the frequency, the sample topics, and years of activity. So for example, as Dr. Catanzano mentioned in my bio, when I was at Brown, I had a lot of med ed leadership roles and curriculum development. I didn't list every lecture I gave every year to the same group of learners. I just had one line and 3 sample topics, and again, the learner's institution, frequency, etc. Because we want to make sure that your CV is digestible to somebody who's reading it. External educational activities is a section that often gives people a lot of pause, and I understand why. This section of the CV is really for talks that are given as part of CME courses that are typically held outside the institution, where the audience is not comprised of med students, residents, or fellows, because those talks go under teaching activities, right? But let's say, like I was invited to do this when I first came here. So Baystate had, pre-pandemic, a really robust CME platform up, in Northampton or Holyoke, where they would put on, like I did one in women's health, where I gave a talk. There were docs from all over Western Mass who came and listened. That was external educational activities. We have a lot of individuals who, at the professor level, who run courses for their professional societies, not conferences, academic conferences, but may give a course on ultrasound. That's what goes here. So grand rounds, talks, invited plenary presentations, those go under invited presentations. So if someone calls you up, sends you an email, hey, I hear you're doing this really cool curriculum. I'm calling from Stanford. Can you come out and give grand rounds on it? That goes there. Talks that you submit as an abstract or a proposal, as I mentioned earlier, that are then reviewed and accepted for a presentation or workshop, go in this section called Other Presentations, Posters, and Abstracts. And I want to make sure individuals are aware that you need to clarify in that section whether each activity was an oral, a workshop, or a poster. And if it was an oral or a workshop and there are several people listed in the citation, if you in fact spoke. This is substance over form, because when we go to look at CVs for promotion readiness, remember I was talking about recognition. So here's an example of where scholarship, because if you have an abstract that's reviewed by your peers and accepted for a national meeting, that is scholarship, but it's a Venn diagram of recognition. So an oral abstract or a workshop where you're presenting, for 10 or 15 minutes and along with colleagues, that speaks to, getting your name out there and how you're recognized in addition to your academic product. And by saying speaker, that distinguishes you from just someone who kind of submitted it in and let your resident present it, right? You got face recognition in your field. Publications. So UMass Medical School is really, really particular about distinguishing and documenting correctly peer-reviewed and non-peer-reviewed pubs. I cannot say enough. So I'm a non-voting member. I sit on the School of Medicine's Appointment and Promotions Committee down in Worcester. We meet once a month. I've been there since November of 2015. It is amazing to me. This is a group of 7 senior faculty elected from all of the faculty, so over 3,000 in any field. So at any given time, you could have, 2 basic scientists who are PhDs. You could have 3, clinical folks in different departments. They don't miss a trick. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen somebody point out in a deliberation, hey, this publication is not peer reviewed. And you never want that to happen, because then it calls into question the rest of the CV, right? So please make sure you are cataloging your pubs in the right way. For some reason, UMass likes the letters to the editor to go under non-peer reviewed. So even if you have a letter to the editor in the New England Journal and they're going to give you lots of feedback on that, it still is not considered peer reviewed for the purposes of the UMass CV. So the best advice I ever got about a narrative statement, which at Brown was called a personal statement, it's the same idea, was you should think about it as setting your CV to music. What do I mean by that? I cannot tell you how helpful, from somebody who, as you might imagine, I get a lot of solicitations to write letters of evaluation for folks going out for professor around the country. I'm happy to do it. I've reviewed, Mark Labrie and I have probably reviewed 3,000 letters since we've started here. So I will tell you that the narrative statements really help provide your context to your CV and anecdotally allow your evaluators, whether they're writing or just kind of reviewing, a better understanding of your contributions. And so I would encourage you have to do it for promotion, but I would encourage you to really be mindful around this exercise, read the guide that's on our website, and describe your activities as if you think about your audience and what they would want to know that rounds out your CV. It's incredibly helpful. Teaching evaluations. So when you go up for promotion for associate or full professor, one has to provide evaluations in this domain, and there needs to be a complement for at least the last 5 years or since your last appointment or promotion. So we have some folks who, have been at the associate professor level for a decade and that's fine, and are going up for promotion. So we really need teaching evaluations for that decade. We have some folks who are going up at year 6, and so 5 years. If there are no teaching evaluations available, and that is highly unusual, in fact, I can think of only 2 instances since I've been here, then UMass has a mechanism for soliciting certain types of letters to support the essence of this particular metric. And this comes up mostly in folks who are in investigation, who do mostly research, and their mentees are the ones who write these letters oftentimes. So when you all go up for promotion, you will, after we spend a lot of time with you fine-tuning your CV, the next big dive is letters of evaluation. And so to be promoted, UMass Medical School requires at least 6 letters. And we and our team strongly encourage 7 or 8 because these letters are the instruments by which you all are going to be assessed, or with which your recognition is going to be assessed. So we have those pieces of evidence of recognition that I described, in terms of leadership and invited talks. This is the third leg of the stool, the letters of evaluation. And I write here that most should be category 2. So what does that mean? And I'm going to unpack that right now. UMass has these different categories of letters. Every institution has them. They just have different nomenclature. So category 2 letters for UMass Medical School mean arm's length. And these arm's length letters are the bread and butter of peer review and academic promotion throughout the country, and are clearly the most critical to your success. And it's because they are unbiased and external. So what that means is category 2 letters need to be from individuals who are at the same or higher rank. So if you're applying for professor, you have to have all professors who are category 2. They can't be from UMass Medical School or UMass Baystate. They can't be collaborators on papers or talks or grants. They can't be current or former mentors. They can't be former supervisors or colleagues from prior institutions or programs. So these letters are the ones that my team and I work really closely with the departments to make sure you have enough proposed evaluators that fit these criteria. Category 1 letters are really attestations, and these are letters that can be from anybody. It's like, she's a nice gal, pretty much, versus, in our field, this is how so-and-so has made an impact. So how the process works is that once you're approved for promotion readiness by your department and our team, we work very closely with the departments. Candidates are asked to do 2 things: to create a narrative statement and to provide the department chair with the name, title, rank, and contact information for 8 to 10 individuals. And again, as I said, that's because these letters are going to be critical to establishing your external reputation and impact. So with that in mind, it's really important that most of the folks who you propose hail from institutions outside of Baystate for associate professors, so throughout New England, and for professor outside of New England, because they have to be at least national. Some are international, actually, and that are not collaborators or former colleagues. How the solicitations work is that the candidate prepares the list, and then the chair or the academic administrator reviews that list. The chair is allowed to add or subtract individuals, and then the list is sent to my team and we review it. The key take-home point from this slide is that the department chair is the one who solicits the letters. Candidates are not allowed to do that, and we have had a few, not a lot, but a few missteps over the years here because folks often confuse letters of evaluation with letters of recommendation. This is not a letter of recommendation. This is something that a third party solicits from, most often, an arm's length individual who will comment under the cloak of confidentiality on your work. And anytime that process is breached, inadvertently, of course, the peer review, the robustness of peer review is then breached. So I want to make sure that folks understand this. Every department has not only a chair, and some have vice chair of academic affairs, but every department has what's called an academic administrator. And sometimes this is the same person who is the EA for your chair, but this is the individual who will collect and really drive all the kind of administrative processes that go along with promotion, and who interfaces very closely with the associate director for faculty affairs. In my office is Mark Labrie.